So you're a coach, and a lot of people are listening are coaches. I coach to some degree. I'm not nearly as good as you are. Uh,
Different.
Big rocks. The big rocks when it comes to like, all right, you're a coach looking to audit your intake process to really get a clear picture. Like, what are the big rocks in your eyes, or what are the things that you see missed most often?
First thing, looking back, so seeing where they're coming from. I think that's that's actually my biggest rock, and I think that's the one that's missed the most, and the one that's not even discussed is looking at where a client is coming from, whether that's nothing, like they've never trained in their entire life before, or whether they're coming from another coach, or what is their previous exercise history, like what sport did they play in high school. Why that gives us some form of idea of like movement patterns that they've kind of been exposed to, also a mental capacity around things. Like if someone played Division One football in high school, or whatever the fuck it is in the United States, high school, you call it high school? High school?
Well, yeah,
College?
Division One would be college,
College,
and then
that's what
high
it is.
school would be high school. Yeah.
We have universities, I guess. Anyways, whatever. D1, it's like, okay, understand what their mental capacity is that you're working with. So you have someone who is more in the athletic mindset versus Peggy Sue, who just wants to lose 5 kilograms and look a little bit better for like the baby shower type scenario. Like that's two very different factors to take into account, but I think it's something that's not spoken about within the client intake as a coach. So it's like the previous, looking back to be able to look forward. Like my whole process of an intake is looking at where am I trying to take, what direction am I taking the client in, and I need to gather as much information around that to be as precise in my planning to take them in that direction. That refers to what have they done previously, what is like their background, what injury history do we have, what is their realistic goal. That's another one that I think needs time spent on within an intake. You got someone who wants to compete and they're 10 weeks out and they look like a tub of milk. Yeah, it's not going to work so well. Like you've got to have the realistic aspect of can they do it? Can they not? Like what are they willing to go to for those extents? And also, is it just plain realistic? Do you want to lose 10 kilograms and you are 100 or you're 60 kilograms soaking wet anyways? It's like, well, you don't have 10 kilograms to lose, and having that realistic conversation with the clients, and sometimes to the detriment of getting business. Like I've had realistic conversations with clients in the past, and they're like, well, I want to do this. I'm like, well, that's fine, but I'm not going to be the person who can do that for you because it's not going to be achievable. Why? Because my reputation and the results at the end of the day matter. Like you come to me to get the result. If I'm going to tell you that the result is not possible, don't shout at me when I tell you that that's not possible. So I think those are probably the two big rocks just off the top of my head. I don't know, your standpoint, your thinking?
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point about work capacity being as much psychological as physiological. And I think that gets missed when we look at exercise selection, when we look at volume prescription out of the gate, when we look at relative intensities, whether it's RPE or reps in reserve. It's like I think a lot of people, they just try and whitewash everyone that comes in the door. But I think, getting an idea of someone's movement history is, it's useful, like for the reasons you mentioned, what repetitive patterns, maybe they have some exposure to weight training as a byproduct of sport. Maybe weight training was the sport, come from a CrossFit background, powerlifting background. And then there's inherent movement biases that each one of those will carry. But it's like, do they know what hard is? Yeah. Right? Like how much of your coaching is going to be on technique, or how much of it is like, maybe we just need to establish a work capacity first. And that's going to massively, especially if you're dealing with someone who's relatively a blank slate. I think a lot of coaches skate by with the novelty factor of resistance training, not realizing that like there's gradations to success in that novelty period of like, whether it's the early adaptation of motor unit recruitment in the first, whatever is cited, 13, 16 weeks, whatever. Most people simplify that to newbie gains. It's like, you can really do some damage in that first 2 months or 3 months or 4 months if you know what the fuck you're doing. Like, people make unbelievable results by just jumping off the fucking sidewalk in the first 4 months of resistance training. But if you can be like, hey, this person actually has somewhat of a muted work capacity. They don't have, they don't really have any sort of background that would indicate like that they know how to work hard. It's like you're probably going to lend their program more to exercises that will, with whatever ability they have, maximize that ability. Not like self-governing exercises that it's very hard to work hard in a squat and a deadlift and a single arm row. And it, like, you could go as almost as far to say, and like, there are anything that's relatively externally unstable is going to make them think more than it's going to make them work. Now, that's really to some degree what a work capacity is your ability to think when you're tired, right? So if you can't coordinate these movements, it's like, that's fine. Let's just build that engine first. And I've seen it done both ways. And if I were to do an A/B comparison or an A/B side by side of coaches who take new clients who understand this principle and just go, oh, okay, like you're relatively new. I'm maybe not going to expend 30, 40 minutes a session teaching you how to squat or trying to load a squat or a deadlift because I've been told by someone that these are foundational or primal or functional movements. I might spend 5 minutes a few times a week on like a goblet squat with your heels elevated. And then I'm just going to like put you in positions where you're just going to work. If for no other reason than to teach you what hard feels like, right? And, if you put a side by side of, subject A and subject B, always without fail, the subject B who goes into and does more work ends up with a much broader base out of the gate. And I think you can screen for that based off like, what have you done?
Yeah. Yeah. I went through stages of looking at program design and programming when I first called it 4 or 5 years ago, and I got exposed to the old like Poliquin way of like not GPP, fuck, what did he call it? GBC. Do you remember old Poliquin GBC? And I thought this was God's gift to the earth. Like when I was starting with like Gen Pop type clientele and this upper lower split, and we were doing supersets of everything and like low skill, low yielding exercises. And then I started looking at the principles behind it. I was like, this is really stupid because, like, what am I getting from a maximal output? There isn't, and, not stupid from a Poliquin standpoint because he was not stupid at all. A little bit touched sometimes, but not completely stupid. And started, like, looking at the principle, and I was like, hold on, but exactly like you said, like, why are we not doing the squat? Why are we not doing the deadlift? Why are we not taking the time to teach those things? And then I applied that. And I looked at the results that I was getting from like a 12-week standpoint. And on the clients who didn't know what hard was, it failed miserably. Completely. And it was my audit of programming and audit. It was actually my audit of my intake about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago when I moved states, because I was trying to figure out a better way to expedite the process. And I literally looked at that exact concept of like, how can I pick up if a person is ready to go through the harder based exercise or the higher skill level exercises that I can utilize further down the line in programming to drive their output. Because at the end of the day, you get someone strong on a barbell, you put them on a machine, they're that much stronger and they can drive that much more output. Like strength training should be the basis, the foundational aspect of training. If you have the time and if you have the ability to teach them from that skill base, and that's the asterisk that needs to be fucking put on a lot of program design. And then I had the magic light bulb of like, son of a bitch, Poliquin was right. It's like, fuck. But right and also not right in turn, like, no, not right, it's not right, not applicable in certain ways. It's like, I can't give, again, Peggy Sue a heavy light style training program, which he ran. It would be like GBC, functional hypertrophy, 6 to 8s, and then like heavy light or some shit like that. That's how the order went. And like I took myself through a heavy light back in the day and I wanted to cry. It was stupid. It was one of the worst things that I'd ever done in my life. I accumulated so much volume, but I also sat there and was like, hold on, I've been through some shit. I can handle this. Peggy Sue, not so much. She would have told me to fuck right off and she would have canceled her subscription or her payments and I would have not been able to eat. But and it all came down from that beginning start intake form of trying to understand like where is an individual at right now, where do they want to go from a realistic standpoint, do the two match, because that's a pretty big aspect of that. And then it's like, did she have the background? You know, I've had moms and general population clientele come to me who have sporting background or want to kind of tap back into that competitive nature or that competitive mindset. If you mark that, or you have that as a flag that goes off on your intake forms, like, all right, maybe I can push this individual. Maybe I do have the capacity to actually drive them as hard as we can. So I think, trying to think about my other parts in the intake, that's a big one. Have they been coached before is another big one. I think, is, as we kind of mentioned, um, if they have been coached and they had a bad experience, I want to know what the experience was. Now, this is more so. This is more so to put a little red fucking asterisk in my back of my brain. Never to do this for this client ever. Whether it's like, I had a client who was like, I got drilled on deadlifts to the point where she got ripped apart by this coach in her deadlift technique that she now hates deadlifts. So do you know what I did not do in her first program? I did not give her deadlifts. Because she's like, yeah, maybe I'm comfortable to try doing deadlifts again. I literally said to her, I was like, you're not touching a barbell to do deadlifts for at least the first 12 weeks. Because she has that mental capacity there. The other one will be, communication, or, I don't know, didn't give me enough feedback on my check-ins, whatever it is. So I make sure I over-compromise. Like, I just compensate as much as I can from that. It's like, I'm going to over-communicate. I'm going to communicate the fuck out of this. It's like, you are going to want to not hear from me. Because they've given you the answer. It's a test that you have the answer for. So it's like, you can't fail if you ask the right question in the very beginning, because they're literally telling you what they need. The other thing is,
Yeah.
I guess I'll just quickly wrap up with that, is ask like what the other coach did wrong, and also what they did right, because then you also know the next answer of like what to continue doing. Like, they literally can give you what you need to do as a coach. And that's not saying that you have to completely change how you are as a coach, but that just gives you like a bit of a framework of, all right, I need to make sure I'm really on my shit, or just continue doing certain things with whatever that is.
I think you brought up a really interesting point out of the gate, and it was talking about the establishing, like, for a work capacity. I want to kind of double back to this again,
Yeah.
because I think on the coach's end, having a realistic framework, and it could start as simple as like an exercise Rolodex or an index, phraseology that we like to use, of movements that work. Like, let's start there, and then start with, if you need to have a container around resistance training, that it's like, and you are containing is the middle part of a bell curve, right? Like, the difference between someone with a low work capacity and a high work capacity, we're talking like maybe a couple exercises, maybe a couple of sets. And I see this done in the nutrition space a lot. There is nothing honorable about programming your client into diabetes,
No.
right? There is nothing honorable about programming your client into this absurd work capacity that's going to require 3-hour sessions, right? So it's like, I am operating a session anywhere between 45 to 90 minutes maximum. I don't care if an athlete, and I'm going to use the word specifically athlete, and like outside of the bodybuilding space, although you could make an argument for 2-a-day sessions in the bodybuilding space. But if I'm working with an athlete who needs 2-a-day sessions, they're an athlete. Like, we are not operating in this chunk, this Venn diagram that we're superimposing over a bell curve, right? They are what we would call an end tail distribution on a bell curve, and long end tails. They are just they're just cruising the x-axis. And so it's like, for the majority of people, the majority of the time, a good heuristic is like, you're dealing probably in a 45 minutes to 90-minute window for like almost anyone, unless that person feeds their family, and in most cases their grandkids with how much money they get made from sport. You're probably not looking outside that window. So that's like, build a container for your, like, what it is you're actually programming for. One, what are the exercises that act as good tools to either drive the stimulus or fatigue that we are looking for to build either work capacity or drive adaptation, respectively, right? So that's thing number one. A time constraint to do this in that's either realistic for a general population client, or is going to extend too long in the physiological demands for someone who might be a high-end athlete. So you kind of have this 45-minute, in my mind, a 45-minute to 90-minute window. Good intake starts with the coach understanding exercise, because it's like when you write your first program, like, and I see this a lot in the nutrition space. There's I've watched people like brag about their client's ability to do 3.5 hour workouts. And I've watched people brag about their clients being able to eat 700 grams of carbs. And for so long, I was so confused. I was like, what do you mean? Why is this person telling everyone that? Like, what? And they're like, no, he's proud of that. I was like, what? He looks like an idiot. Why is he bragging about it? He's like, yeah, I don't know. It's insane. And I think that's fundamental. If you're a coach, and in this little bucket of the conversation, you need to really rein in, like, hey, what am I doing? I am putting exercises in order, prescribing volume within this 45 minutes to 90-minute container, 3 to 7 days a week, right? And if it's 3 to 7, it's probably looking more like the 45 minute. And if it's 3 times a week, you're probably looking more maybe the 90-minute. And like, that's it. Like, understand that the subtle changes you make at the top of the bell curve over time are what are really going to push you uphill. And it's the changes are like an extra set, a progression of a particular exercise. But like, a lot of the coaches I find that don't really understand this aspect of an intake are the same coaches that every 4 to 6 weeks are getting a completely overhauled program. Like, you don't respect the stimulus that you're driving. And then you see that from the very beginning of, like, you're just throwing the kitchen sink at everything.